Hi, everybody. This is John Atack yet again, and I'm intrigued and fascinated to welcome Shawn McCraney. Hi, Shawn.
Hi, John, and I am intrigued and fascinated to be here with you. I've
Mm.
watched some of your things, the Manson stuff, and some of your insights on Scientology. Really great. I really appreciate you taking the time with me.
Oh, well, it's a great pleasure. I watched a video that our friend Matt Bywater, my colleague Matt Bywater, made with you, and I found it entirely compelling. And we've spoken briefly the other week, but I'm trying to find the words to say how we're going to describe you. And I think what I'm opting for, if you agree, is a redeemed predator. How does that feel?
I will accept that readily.
Yeah, because I think you and I both have a little bit of a problem with words like sociopath, psychopath, narcissist, all of this kind of stuff. So they carry so much baggage.
Yeah.
So you were born with a predatory nature, and you were brought up, particularly by your mum, from what I've seen, to be predatory.
Nurture. Yeah. It was all there.
Tell us something about your early childhood. Let's start there. The way you behaved towards other children as a child.
I guess the best way to summarize is that I was originally aggressive, demanding, but friendly. And I wanted to engage with people, but when I did, I quickly realized that they did not operate the way I wanted them to. And so I had to start to manipulate my surroundings in order to get those things to happen. And there was an overt aggression in me, and that would grow when resisted. And it was there from a very young age with the neighborhood kids. And I was never really, I was never able to fit into the way society saw things. I was always off a little bit. I've learned later from my dad that my grandfather was a lot like that. He was almost like autistically relating to the culture and community around him. I didn't know that. So I'm sure a lot of this has come from his side and being just a little bit off kilter. You know how you're in a community and you see people in a group and they're just not in sync? That was me.
Yeah. And I mean, from watching your conversation with Matt and later with Anthony Magnabosco, I've been studying this condition since the 1980s, when I started to try and understand what had driven Lafayette Ronald Hubbard to do the awful things he did to people, and why it was also that so many of us believed in him, despite the fact that when you added up his behavior, he was selfish and sadistic even. And it seems to me that you show that there are nuances to this. This isn't a simple cut and dried thing. The thing that particularly got me is that the standard definition of the psychopath, the foundational definition, is somebody who doesn't have conscience. But you said that you grew up within the Church of the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. You're up there in Salt Lake City, Mormon Central. And
I am now.
Yeah, you are now. And it seemed that the rules of the Mormon Church, and particularly as they apply to sexuality and sexual desire, those were things that you felt you had to follow as a young man, that you were within that system.
Yeah, and I think, John, since we talked last, I thought about that, and I really think that was because I was sexualized very, very early through a bunch of neighborhood experiences and familial experiences. And so I think because I was sexualized so early and was so interested in sexual things, that the LDS Church's teachings were constantly hitting me on that note, because I knew on that note I had something that was off. And so think that that played into my just feeling badly about the sexuality, but not wanting to stop my ways. Wanting to, I should say, but not stopping my ways. Yeah.
And how young were you when you had your first sexual awakening?
Boy, I mean, we're talking like very young, 3 to 4.
Okay.
Yeah. And then ongoing with members of the family, strangers who preyed upon me when I was in my early teens, 12 and 13. And then just random engagements. I would be walking to school, to a school or through a school on a Saturday, and there would be somebody there, and somehow we would end up being engaged sexually. So it was it was just like this kind of thing around me that I increasingly knew about myself, and it blossomed. But I also had the LDS church constantly saying, you know, how, you know, that is, your body's sacred and it is to be shared with your wife only in marriage, in the temple, la, 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 la. And so there was this, but there was also some conscience to that. And that's why this nuance we're talking about is so important, John, because I mean, L. Ron Hubbard, I could see myself, if I never had my roadside experience, being very much like L. Ron Hubbard. You know, you take him in his disparate parts, you can accept him. But when you put that guy together, look out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. The other aspect of your behavior, which I want to look at from, and this is a conversation that I anticipate is going to take 10 or 20 hours. So
okay.
we're not going to get this done. You are way too complicated to get this done in 10 minutes.
Okay.
But the other aspect is the violence, the aggression. How early was it that you started it to experience, well, to actually exhibit violence towards other people?
The minute I was in a circumstance where there were other people who confronted me, my age, whatever it was, my tendency is still, even today, initially violent reaction. So, and that I never had any kind of tampering down by the LDS Church, because that religion almost endorses it. They come close to endorsing violence. And so I never really felt any compulsion not to fight, not to be brutal.
And so from early childhood, you'd be getting into scraps with other kids, yeah?
Oh, yeah. 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 And I would go to the principals, and my mom would get called, and I would get not timeouts, for what they call them, detentions, and all of those things. But my mom encouraged it too. She encouraged me to be tough. Her oldest son, my oldest brother, who took his life, my oldest brother was not a confrontational boy. And so my mom did not really like that about him, and she wanted her second son to be something a little tougher, and that is what I was kind of groomed to be.
Yeah. So, I mean, when we talked before, and you said that it was both nature and nurture, which I think is very important, because there is evidence that given proper nurture, you know, we have James Fallon, of course, the pro-social sociopath, this idea that your natural inclinations can be reined in, and which is something you have done for yourself much later on in life.
Right.
Okay, so you told Matt that you know, if a hitchhiker flipped the bird at your mum when she was driving past, she'd stop the car, roll back, and so go get him, Shawn.
And I'd jump out and I would pummel, and I'd get back in, and the way I recollect it, we just drive on.
Yeah. And how badly damaged would the hitchhiker be by this point?
Not badly. It would be to the point where they're crying mercy. I wasn't a murderer. I had a murderous, but I had a violent intent. And there's a little bit of a difference, again, nuance there. I don't think I sought to murder, but I could have murdered, and I could be driven to that anger level, but that wasn't my intent. My intent was to dominate, shut up, teach a lesson, stop them from doing whatever they were doing that irritated me. Yeah.
And you still feel that. Yeah, that's still.
I battle it. Like we talked, John, I battle it daily. It's not something that just goes away. And the way I see it is I'm in this body with these chemicals and this background and this DNA. And I don't think the mechanics of that can really be altered physically or biologically. But what I think can happen is you can learn how to manage it. And that's what I learned, is learned how to manage it. And that's through something we'll talk about. But prior to that, there was no management, none. Day or night, violence.
And that meant that you'd get into altercations almost daily, sort of several times a week?
Weekly, well, first of all, as a teen, daily, then as a young adult, less, but more, maybe weekly, every other week. And so you learn, because you can't do that constantly, or you go to jail, and you learn that the law is out there and that you're not impervious to punishment. So I had to also get smart, and I had to learn how to get my revenge and exact it on people at the right time. So I learned to control that violent thing. It wasn't so impetuous anymore. It was more calculated. So I guess over time, I became more calculated in what I was doing. And that includes sexual relations and everything else. Everything became more and more calculated. Beastly when I was a little kid, calculated as I grew.
And I mean, and I think that says something about your temperament, that you have the ability to consider things intellectually and then make decisions. So the impulsivity that is usually associated with predatory people, your intelligence is such that you were able to await gratification, as they say, and put off the revenge, but you still wanted to get your own back. You still wanted to get revenge.
Yeah, and I almost always did.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, yes, I did. You're right. You're right. And so we could throw that in as something that's mitigating my condition. I do have the ability to reason through things and make decisions today, I would say, better than I did before.
Yeah, it would certainly seem so. And you said that you felt no empathy, and that's something that started to change when you started having children. Yeah. So I think if you could tell us a little about the attachment, the feelings you had when your first child was born. Did you have that paternal connection immediately, or was that something that developed?
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit this, and this is hard for my daughters to hear, but I don't see people in terms of this is my daughter. I love her because she's mine. I see everybody as people, and I try to love them the same. I don't have a different kind of love, but I have a different responsibility for my daughters. And that I've always been responsible, oddly enough, on things I care about. And so I've been able to responsibly see, I brought them in. These are little ones relying on mom and dad. It was too much of my ego would be harmed if I became a deadbeat dad. My ego, we got out into the community that I wasn't helping, and that would be too much for my ego. So I had to initially do that. I didn't really feel it, but I knew that was something that was important, and it would be important to me to do. And I do love them. I love them. I love them greatly, but it started off with responsibility, I guess. And maybe that's normal for males. I don't know.
I think it's certainly a part of the package, but I mean, I have a friend who, when his second child was born, because he didn't feel blissed out about it, took to his bed for
Oh,
4 days.
yeah. Yeah. Oh,
And,
yeah. No bliss going on. Yeah. No.
and and how is your relationship? You have 3 daughters, is that right?
I do. I have 3 daughters. They're all in their 30s. 2 are married, 1 is not. And I have a wonderful relationship with all of them. They're all in their own right, very unique, and we speak weekly, if not daily, and yeah, no issue there. I never molested them. I never physically harmed them. Maybe a couple times I grabbed their arm. I would be very direct verbally, but never, no beatings, no molestings, nothing like that. I was able to take them and sequester them in my mind away from the rest of the human populace and what I would do to them.
Which is quite fascinating. And it suggests that there's some little kernel of empathy that was always there, ready to be stimulated.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
in this case, it was stimulated by what you call your roadside experience in 1997. Is that right?
Yeah. Stimulated, germinated, planted, began. All of those words was the genesis of my starting to look inwardly and realize something has to change.
And that was a religious experience that you had, yeah?
It was a religious epiphany. I want to stay here, claim here and now. You know, I've read William James, Religion and Its Varieties. I've done all that. And I understand that religion is very subjective and that our experiences with it are entirely between the individual and whatever maker they have. I am not saying that this is something everybody should have, must have, but I had it. And do you want me to tell it, John?
Yes, please do.
Yeah. So by August of 1997, I'd been married for maybe 13 years. I had jobs, but I was miserable in all of them. I was a stockbroker, miserable, searching through Eastern metaphysics, Greek philosophy, French literature, Marx, Engels, Lenin, Trotsky. I sought through all of it to try to find out what is true. And it was a sincere effort. And by August 97, and I had tried sexual dalliances, I had tried drugs, I tried all that, and violence wasn't working. And so I had, as a man, been kind of brought to the end of my rope, literally. And that day I was really down, and I was driving to pick my daughters up, and I had become a nihilist in the sense that I did not believe in anything. I thought there could be things, but I was really void. And active Mormon at the same time in my ward, doing the jobs, you know, actively, but self-harming, under my clothes, burning myself and cutting and all kinds of things to deal with this angst of what is wrong with me? Why can't I be like other people, so to speak? And the radio was on a station, and there was a guy on there, and he said, if you could get your life right, why haven't you done it? And for our audience watching, you know, I had been on a Mormon mission, believe it or not. And I was one of those guys going door to door. I conformed enough, but I got in fights on the Mormon mission, you know? So I had done all the things, but nothing was working. And the guy on the radio said, the reason that you haven't changed yourself is because you can't change yourself. You cannot do it. And so I listened. I thought, wow, that is really a remarkable claim, because the church I've been going to, all they've been saying is you can do it, you better do it, you should do it.
Yeah.
So this gave me something to believe that I had not really understood yet. And I listened to him, and he said, and that's why Jesus came. And I don't even like the name Jesus. I call him Yeshua, and Yeshua came. And this guy says he lived a life that you couldn't live, and you will never live, and he died for you. And so therefore, stop trying to fix yourself. I'm summarizing here. Look to him in faith. And that started me on, wow, I had an option here. It wasn't about me doing it. It was about someone else coming who was qualified, apparently, to do what I couldn't do for humanity, but did it for me too, because I'm part of humanity. And at the end of that day, I had been radically changed in my mindset before the living God. My mindset now was, he is not out to get me. I am not causing him to be angry at me. He loves me as I am. And I was the worst. That's why I say I was the worst of the worst, was saved by the best of the best. So when that locked into my brain, I was what they call regenerated, born again, and I had new eyes to see. And I could see now that it wasn't up to me to do these things. It was up to him and me just to look to him in faith. No, nothing else. And on the important thing to remember about that experience, I came home and told my wife, and she thought it was, just another one of my journeys. It's marks, it's this, and that it would fade, but it didn't. And I started to allow, this is how believers put it, to allow him to take the reins and him make the decision on what to do when there's somebody at a stoplight that won't go when the light turns green. He says, John, that's my job. That's not your job, in my mind, And so I surrendered to him. I let him take over my life. And that's been going on since 97. And it has worked. And the thing that's convinced my wife, who was LDS, and my 3 daughters, who were all LDS, and we were all engaged, to all leave that faith, was not doctrine. It was not the people. It was the fact that I had changed so much. It was that witness to them that they said, he's had something happen to him that we're not getting anywhere else. And so they started to listen and come along. And that's really the nutshell story of what happened to help me see the light, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think I really was very impressed by what you said to Matt and to Anthony Magnabosco, because you seem to have, we're all kind of used to Bible bashers. We're all kind of used to people who are trying to evangelize and get us to believe something. Your view seems to be highly rational and highly personal, that you're saying this is how I see the world. It may not be how the world is.
Yeah.
But it is how I see the world. And you stopped Anthony Magnabosco in his tracks by basically saying, and if you take this away from me, I'll become the old Shawn again. And I've often wondered if Anthony, American pronunciation. I've often wondered if he thinks about what happens to people after he's kind of stopped them in the street and pulled away their belief. That, it's concerned me, I must say.
Well, your concern is justified. And I love Anthony. I think he's a wonderful human being. And I'm sure in what he's doing, there has been some good. He's opened the eyes of people who are in religious bondage. Fine.
Yeah.
But I do find it highly irresponsible. Street epistemology, I find that highly irresponsible, because on the street, you don't know what people are clinging to.
Yeah.
So I worry about that a little bit, to tell you the truth.
Well, and there needs to be a follow-up. I've been very much involved with helping people to change their beliefs from malignant beliefs to hopefully more helpful beliefs. But no part of that is me suggesting that I know the truth.
Right.
It's absolutely about them finding out what their truth is and how they feel. And
that's beautiful.
Well, it just seems sensible. You want people to think for themselves. Well, you're going to have to put that there and say, well, and so it has often happened that at the end of a conversation with somebody where, they've decided that they are going to change what they're doing in life, that they'll then say to me, well, what do you believe? At which point I have to say, oh, no, you don't want that. You look at the mess on it.
Yeah. That could lead you right back in the dark.
Exactly. And it means I have an empty bank account, obviously, but that's not necessarily the most important thing in life.
Right.
So, I mean, when we talked and having watched you in conversation, you come over as one of the most charming people I've ever met. I just have to say that. And yet what you're saying is that you fundamentally don't trust anyone and that you've learned how to charm people. And when I asked you about that before, I said, well, you know, because you said that when you were a kid, you went through this change where you realized that other kids weren't doing what you wanted. And so you learned how to charm them. So tell our viewers what that means or how that works.
Well, you know, I was kind of like the king in Lord of the Flies or something at one point in time when we were all young. But a kid named Mike, he got his black belt in judo in the neighborhood. And when I saw that power base sort of shift, that I'm not going to be able to lead anymore the way I had, looking back, I think that's when I started to see you get more with honey than you do vinegar. And so it became part of my approach. I have to admit, what we say, my charm, that is natural to me. I am that way, and I mean that sincerely. But I used it in those former years to get what I wanted. And I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm not feigning liking you, but I am doing it for a reason. Yeah. I don't know if that helps, but so I guess that might make me even more sinister when I'm not following, because I am someone who can attract people just by virtue of whatever I am as in my physical self and how I relate to people. The only difference is today I care about you, John. I care about anybody. I care about them in a way that I never, ever, ever cared about before, and I would not prey upon them anymore because of what happened.
And how do you feel on a daily basis? You seem to express yourself as a happy person, but you also are talking about having to struggle every day. So where is the balance in that for you?
My nature is affable, but my inward temperament is rage.
Okay.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And I think some people know that. I think they can see it. And I don't, and I would just mark them as being smart. Because I've had to take all the things that anger me constantly and set them aside. That builds up. And unless you have some means to get rid of it, you're going to be so happy's a kind of a word. It looks like I'm happy. I think I'm really, what you're witnessing is I'm more filled with kind of a joy, kind of a satisfaction, kind of I've been emancipated in who I was. And because of that, I'm grateful. But I'm really not a happy person. Things don't make me happy. Very few things make me happy. Externally, so I don't know. I'm kind of confused right now on that subject. Happiness and circumstantial, you know? So I don't trust happiness. I think it can be yanked away from us at any time. So I'm not happy because I don't trust happiness. I'm all self-protected still, you know? But outward, I'm trying to choose to love and do it right. It's getting a little in the weeds here with your questions, more than it was with Matt, because I'm having to really start to think.
Well, I think Matt did a fantastic job.
He did.
And of course, he came to me and he said, "You've got to talk to this guy, but watch my interview first." Now, you know, I don't watch a lot of YouTube, so I've got to say, because there's too much of it, and I'm so busy with what I'm doing. But I sat down and started watching, and I went, Matt's right. I need to understand this because there are so many contradictions here. So the notion of joy, that was something that struck me as well. Do you take pleasure from music? Do you take pleasure from art?
I do. And boy, you're astute, because those two things, along with food, sex, and getting high, they make me happy. Art, film, good film, hard music, food, sex, and they make me happy. You're right. Anything outside of that, I don't go to, I'm probably like you maybe, John. I don't go to sporting events. I don't watch it. I don't participate. I don't care about men's group. I don't care about cars. I don't care about anything but those things I just mentioned. They make me happy. So it's kind of like my pleasure centers, the size of a lizard's. And I just, I can be very easily satisfied with those fleshly things.
But, one of the commonplaces, particularly with extreme psychopaths, and you're very evidently not a serial killer or a criminal psychopath, but is that they have tremendous difficulty in taking pleasure in the world. And so they ramp things up to the extreme, and you then have the escalation phenomenon, which the FBI are so interested in, that they have to keep doing more. They have to keep pushing further. And you perhaps had a little bit of that escalation before quite a lot of it, before your roadside experience. And that, however we define what happened, and I'm an agnostic, and I'm absolutely happy for people to define the world in their own way. It really doesn't bother me. Well, actually, sometimes it does bother me. Let's be honest. There are things that, if I read about the thuggies going out and murdering people for the sake of Carly, that does bother me, I must admit. But for the most part, the sense of, believing in a higher power, or believing in the Tao, or, believing in Buddha mind, or whatever, that's absolutely fine. But in your case, your particular experience allowed you to transform. But you said something that I think is really smart, which is that, and you'll forgive me for saying that, I'm sure, but which is that it wasn't like, oh, now I'm born again and everything's fine. Your realization was you were still the same person, and you were going to have to keep working at it. And this gave you an access to that, which seems so much more sensible than, I don't have to bother and I don't have to do any more work about this, which I think is often the case. And people who are that way will generally lapse. They'll last a certain time and then they'll return to what they were before. But for you, it's been something, we're talking, 26 years now?
Yeah.
So that's quite a marathon.
And I stand vehemently against the Christian idea of, you're saved and everything changes, and because all that does is it makes the person susceptible to more deception, and they're living a counterfeit life. It's not really what I would think God would want for them. He doesn't want them embracing some package and swallowing the Kool-Aid and becoming something. He wants us engaged, in my opinion. And so I wasn't going to allow anything to be feigned. That's really important to me, John, in our conversation, is that if it was going to be real, it fucking better be real, because I have dealt with all the fake stuff and it does not work, because like you said, the recidivism is huge. When you grab something that's emotionally charging and you think it's your savior, and then, a month, a year, you're back, beating people on the side of the road.
Yeah.
So it does take work. It does take getting involved in that and not resigning, but fighting.
And realizing the benefit of what you've achieved, but knowing that you're going to have to keep on climbing. You're still on the rock face.
There you go.
Yeah.
And I think that's rational thinking for anybody, whether God's included or not. And so I think that if you just take an X and X makes you think this way, X would work for you. I just happen to assign it more to something more personal in my estimation, but that's me, like I said.
Yeah. And which I think is very honorable. How about humor? Are you because you seem to enjoy a degree of humor?
I love it.
Yeah.
I love humor.
And does that go back?
Gallows humor, dark humor, great humor. Kind of often part of something when I was younger that was not accepted, a little too early, too soon with me. I find the humor quickly in a devastation and would share it. And then, there's timing. So you have to learn to time your humor. I'm getting better at that.
Mm. And as a young man, did you find the suffering of others humorous?
Oh yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I still find suffering of, as long as it's not going to kill them or maim them, to me, it's hilarious.
Mm.
It is just flat out hilarious. And that's the funny thing. Like Matt, he and I traveled a little bit together here in Utah, and he's so kind. I mean, he's helping a squirrel that can't find its nut. I'm like, chase that thing down. I mean, and we are so different in the way that we just are. But humor, I just find humor in everything, really.
Yeah, it's fundamental to me. My wife and I were talking a couple of years ago, and as we were getting to know each other, and she asked me what my drive was, and I said amusement, and she was a little bit shocked by this, and I said, but it that's what's kept me afloat. I've lived through very hard times. You know, I had Scientology harassing me on a daily basis for 16 years, and you've got to see the funny side, you know, about ourselves, and you know that we aren't all that. We aren't that important, really.
And humor kind of brings that out, doesn't it? It shows, John, that you have humor and you're not seeing yourself as so important. You can't find humor even in pain. And that's what makes us human.
Yeah. I mean, I never thought about whether there was any connection between the word humility and the word humor. And
I think there might be.
Yeah, they might be cognate. Because, you know, that leads us to a very significant realization for anybody, which you express. You know, I see that you are not, you know, this is not braggadocio. You're not kind of, well, I'm fantastic, I found Jesus and I'm going to preach down to you. You seem, in fact, to have come to the opposite and proper perspective, which is we're human. And there's that HUM again, the beginning of that word, you know.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
So your experience with, and I say, I'm going to want to come back and grill you for hours and hours and hours over the coming months. I'm sure of it.
Oh, I can't wait. Just kidding.
But, so we're only going to get a short distance in this conversation. I'm so aware of that. But your religious background, how old, your parents joined the LDS when you were a child, or were you born into it?
Yeah, my mom, East LA, not very wealthy. Missionaries came to her door when she was married. She converted first. My dad converted. They had 2 children at that time, and then I was born later into the Mormon church, and used it as a way to govern their large family. My parents were essentially hard working white trash that wanted to rise above and be better in their life, and they proved that they could. So they came from tough times. The Mormon church helped them become more acceptable in the world, and they thought they would do the same for their children.
And we've mentioned your mom. What sort of man was your dad?
My dad was probably a benign narcissist.
Okay.
Everything was about him. He was an only child, and he really didn't judge. He didn't care. He didn't, as long as it didn't affect him. You know, pretty much that.
I'm fascinated that you use the term benign narcissist, because so few people seem to realize that there are malignant narcissists who do harm in the world, but there are also benign narcissists who are just selfish and self-involved.
Oh, goodness.
That's
probably more prevalent, don't you think?
Oh, I think our whole society is pushing towards that as the ideal state for humanity. They want everybody to be, you know, 16 years old and stuck at home with their phone, buying as many things as possible while playing video games.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad to talk to you. It is apparent.
And hopefully what we're doing might help some people to realize that that is a completely vacuous and empty way to be.
Yeah.
There's nothing in it. There's also, I put forward a third class, which is benevolent narcissists, people who have to be adulated because they don't have a sense of self otherwise. So David Bowie, Elton John, Taylor Swift currently. There's watched an amazing documentary about her. And she's interesting because I'm not particularly interested in her musically, but she's evidently brilliant. There are no two ways about that. And she writes some good lyrics and very smart. And also said to be the most polluting person on the planet because of the amount of airplanes she owns. I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought it was Richard Branson personally, but we won't get into that. But it's clear that there's video of her from sort of 3 years old or what have you, and she keeps saying, people have to approve of what I'm doing. People have to, and there's a point where she's crying because she's not won a Grammy, and she's going, "I've got to try harder. I've got to try harder." And you go, "You've got more private planes than Donald Trump. What's wrong with you? You're there." Yeah. With David Bowie, he talked about his parents not loving him, and that he says that Major Tom represents him, that he's trapped in this tin can and can't communicate with people. And I think as he grew older and incredibly famous and influential, he became human. He grew up, he matured. I think that's certainly true of Elton John. So you have, they're narcissists, but they produce art because they want people to applaud them. So, I mean, if you look at Bowie's early recordings, The Laughing Gnome or Chim Chimney, Chim Chim Cheree, all sung in the voice of Anthony Newley, which he kind of retained throughout his life, that he wanted to be a star. Joe Cocker once said that he was surprised when he met other singers that so many of them wanted to be stars, whereas what he wanted to do was to sing. And I think you can tell when you listen to him. But, so we have these other ways, these ways of being, which are very damaging. That we have a society that's adrift. We're largely led by predators. Destructive people, whether they're Democrat, Republican, conservative, communist, socialist, whatever they are. We seem to favor this type of personality. And I think that you provide some kind of key to that, in that you can show people what's going on inside the politician's head, what they're actually, they're not looking towards peace and love and harmony for all of humanity. They're looking for something that's about their role and their dominance. Would you care to expand on that? Do you have any comment upon that?
It's fascinating, John, because before my 97 change, I would have had a lot to say about the others. Today, it's more of, I'm not sure I'm in a place to judge somebody who gives all the signs of being a lunatic, maniac, demagogue, Donald Trump, all the signs of being narcissistic. I don't know things. And so try to hold back comment now on all of it but generally speaking, I think you're dead on with your principles you just presented. And I do think our society has become incomprehensibly selfish, self-absorbed. And because of that, I think they're able to be led by these malignant narcissists in their power plays because they're promised liberty, but they're not getting it. I don't know. I'm venturing into an area I don't really understand. It's something you and Matt are a little bit more inclined to, but I did want to comment something you said about art, creativity, Taylor Swift, Bowie, and John, and that is, before I had my change, I too wanted fame. I thought it was special, and I wanted to achieve the highest of whatever it would be, and I thought it might be business or something. I don't know why. And today, I'm of the, and my daughter and I would call this the inhibited artist, inhibited creativity. And I would be in the Christian faith more like Joe Crocker. I would not be Elton John. The Christian faith is full of the Elton Johns. They're pastors and they're mega churches and I am more like Joe Crocker. I want to do my art privately and I don't give a shit what you think about it. And so I retain my integrity while being creative. And so it's a little bit different than what Bowie and other people had. I want the right to be as individual and as creative as I see it, and for nobody to get in my way, and for me not to get in anybody's way. And that's my vision of a better life. Yeah. I don't know anything, but that's my vision of it.
No, I think it's a good vision. It also became evident from your other conversations, and I really want people to go and look at what Matt did and what you did with who was the other guy with Anthony?
His name is John DeLynn. He is one of the largest podcasters on Mormonism in the world.
Yeah, that's it. The podcast is, what's it called?
It's called Mormon Stories.
Mormon Stories, yeah. So I think it'd be very useful to people to go and have a look at what you said there. And I don't want to, go through the same ground. Yeah. So there's still some lure for people to do that. But one thing that came out that, I'm very impressed with you. What can I say? You may have got the idea by now. And one of the things that you put forward is something that I believe profoundly, which is that organized religion is not very good for us generally. That I'm a believer in disorganized religion, probably. But so you had a period where you were involved with evangelical Christianity, quite a long period, I think.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, I have this sense that the organization molds people towards its own aims. And so you'll start, the great scandals of child sexual abuse among the Catholics, the Anglicans, the Methodists, the Baptists, the Jehovah's Witnesses, wherever you look, institutionalized religion seems to start protecting predatory people and elevating predatory people. You've said this about the Mormons, that you felt looking at the senior figures around you, that they were the same as you. There were people who were out for everything they could get, and they had no concern for others. So tell us that, how you feel about, when what is the right sort of amount of people in a religion? I think it's probably one, that you have your relationship. Let's get off into Joe Campbell, this idea that there are shamanic religions where somebody has a vision and an experience, often during an illness as a child, and they then teach that, and they become a medicine man or a witch doctor or a shaman or whatever we want to say. Then you get religions which have books and a priesthood, and the priests recite the books. They don't have the experience anymore. You open that out a little bit for us from your own perspective.
Okay, from my perspective, and let me say this, and it's really important for me to say it, John, is that my nose has been in that ancient text, what they call the Bible. That book does not support organized religion. No. In the least, it does not support it. It supports one person and their direct relationship to whoever. That is what you just said is absolutely true. Why? Because God knows that when humans collect, they make themselves God. They have a culture. They demand conformity. They teach their books, their priesthood, and then thinking is done, and then depredations are allowed in that. When the thinking stops within a group of people, that's when you can start screwing their daughters. So bottom line, I believe that the text clearly shows that all of religion, all of it, is idolatry. It's just a form of idolatry. And it is not what God intended, and that's for the individual. And by the way, we're all agnostics, John. Forget about anything else. We are not operating on any proofs here. It's all we don't know. So let's get that straight.
Yeah.
But that being said, religion is anathematic to liberty. It's anathematic to freedom, love. Because let me put it to you this way. If you give one law, one rule in a group of people, just one, that's what religions do. You cause automatic hate and acceptance for each other. We have a church, and I say, okay, the only church we have here is you must not be from Great Britain. You can't be from Great Britain. All right. So suddenly we all become haters of people from Great Britain. And if somebody from Great Britain comes, we ostracize them. That's antithetical to the message of God. Religion is a poison. It's not just the opiate of the masses. It's a poison. Is ruining people and taking them captive when God is just saying, come on, man. Come on. Love. I'm right with you on the religion thing. Right with
you. Yeah. I mean, and you mentioned William James and the varieties of religious experience, which is an absolutely vital text. Yeah. He was a remarkable man. I spent years, you know, it was only a couple of years ago, I read a book called Ghost Hunters by Deborah Blum, who was the president of the American Science Writers Guild. So that's who she is. And this book blew my mind because I didn't know that William James was a founder of both the British and the American Societies for Psychical Research, and was himself profoundly committed to religious belief. And he is the father of psychology. And yet he was skeptical, agnostic, and rational about it. And in the end felt that those societies for research had not really given full scientific proof of anything, though some of what they did is really quite fascinating.
Yeah.
But he points to one principle which for me is life transforming, and that's the principle that he calls noesis, the idea of certainty, that feelings of knowing, feelings of certainty. And the example I've been giving for decades now, when I was 17, I had a conversation with a born again, and we talked for about 2 hours on a sunny afternoon on the street, and he backed away from me. I just reread the Gospels, and you know, from an agnostic point of view, and there's so much that's beautiful in there and useful. But he wanted to try and impress on me these ideas, and I'm saying, well, that's not what the Gospel says. You know, it says this. I just read it, so I was able to. And he backed away from me. He was like, he wouldn't turn his back on me because he can see, you know, I was disagreeing with him, so I must be of the devil or something. And he looked at me and he said, I don't understand the Bible, but I know it's all true.
Oh boy.
And you find yourself in that place where, you know, how much of what we believe in life is because we want to believe it, and you know, how willing are we to test it? And I'm with you. I think that when you connect to the sense of compassion, let's just call it that, when you connect to that and you realize, and for me that was, I was born there, that I was concerned about other people's feelings, other people's happiness, you know, was important to me. And I'm at the opposite end of the scale. I have the empathy disorder. And I'm going to label it for what it is. It you know, because you don't get to decide. You know, it's a knee-jerk thing, just as your responses were the way your nature is. And you know, it can be, you can be pulled too far into this and find that you are not, you're not even doing the best you might do in the world, because you're being pulled around. And often, if you're empathetic, you're being pulled around by people who don't have your best interests at heart, and you find yourself serving things that they want. To that extent, that there's a type of person I call a weaponized empath. And looking at Scientology and having interviewed so many of the senior officials of Scientology, people who work with Hubbard, there are some really lovely people who did really gruesome things to others for years because they believed this would eventuate in something good. I think you can even look at Heinrich Himmler, the founder of the SS, the head of the Gestapo, Minister for the Interior, creator of the Ahnenerbe, the Lebensborn, all of this horrible nonsense that he generated, that he may well have been driven by empathy. He may well have been convinced that by exterminating Jews, Romans, blacks, Slavs, anybody who got in the way, a good and perfect and heavenly existence would be achieved. There's a thought. I can see from your face that that one's
That's
interesting.
radical. Wow. And I loved how you said that, because I've never really thought much about that site really until I met Matt. I think he might suffer from some of that same. I'm not diagnosing him, but he might be a victim to his empathy.
Yeah.
And maybe you can be abused and used so readily by people who can spot that, you know, don't pay my bills. And maybe you end up enabling people instead of really helping them.
Exactly so. And
fascinating.
There's a book, where's it gone? Against Empathy by Paul Bloom at Yale. And he argues the case for rational compassion.
Ooh.
And you don't have to read the book now, because that's all he says.
Hey, I just sunk in. I got it.
Yeah, just saved you $25 there. What I came to is that in life we have the pleasure we feel, and I think it's good to feel pleasure. I'm against Puritanism. I don't see any point in it at all. It bores the hell out of me. But if we actually want to be happy, if we want to be satisfied, contented in life, for me, the only way of doing that is by helping other people. It's by getting something done. I had an email a couple of weeks ago. This happens from time to time, from a woman who said, we spoke for an hour on the phone in 1994 and it was life transforming. And I'm kind of going, well, yeah, it was life transforming because somebody listened to her and had an answer to her question, which was she'd actually been involved for years with a sub Scientology cult run by a guy who'd worked with her, and who I knew reasonably well. I interviewed him for my book in the 80s, and I'd see him a couple of times a year. And she calls me 10 years after I first met this guy, and I get on with this guy. You know, he's kind of a friend of mine, you know, not close. And she goes through the details of what had happened to her and says, was I involved in a cult? And she's not named him. And so I say, well, you know, whatever we're going to call a cult, yes, this sounds like a destructive cult. You know, let's put the adjective in there. And she then named the leader of the group, and I'm going, oh. And I knew he was still practicing Scientology, and I tried to persuade him it wasn't a great idea. But so I was a catalyst for that to happen. And I don't think that makes me any great shakes. I just listened and identified from what I know about abusive relationships that it was an abusive relationship. But to get that, you know, 30 years later, to have somebody say, you facilitated a transformation in my life. For me, that is, you know, that makes me happy. That makes me content.
I'm going to jump on that bandwagon, because in addition to sex, drugs, rock and roll, and art, that makes me happiest. Is when someone says, my life is improved because you contributed this to it. I would have jumped on that bandwagon. And so if that's the height for me, and you also see, and we come from polarized ends of the spectrum, perhaps we can start to change something here with this.
This is what excited me when I saw Matt's conversation with you. You know, as I've mentioned James Fallon and his notion of the prosocial sociopath, which I think is very important. If we cannot change predatory behavior, I don't think humanity has a hope. And you know, my formulation is that until we stop fighting wars, we won't be able to maintain our environment properly. That's the thing that we're doing. That's, you know, and then you've got all of the corporate greed and all of that stuff. But I think warfare is the key to it. And warfare comes out of propaganda. It comes out of tricking and deceiving people into thinking that other people are actually their enemies. And we see this sort of, you know, rather than finding the perpetrator of a deed, so say Muhammad Atta and his 18 friends at 9/11, they all died. So you can't get your own back on them. And the idea was, well, let's go to Afghanistan and Iraq and kill an enormous amount of people until we feel better. And we don't feel better. What we actually feel is we've now got tens of thousands of veterans in the US and the UK who will suffer for the rest of their lives, quite possibly, because of what happened to them, because of the situation they were put into. So the victims of 9/11 were not just the 3,000 tragic deaths there, but the estimation is that 750,000 people have died in Iraq and 150,000 in Afghanistan. So we're close to a million people to get that taste of revenge, which has actually just made everything worse. So for me, if we can teach people to look at the propaganda and say, oh, that's not in fact true, rather than I'm going to go and kill those people, the first Iraq war, I was in Bishop, California, the day it broke out. And we went into a store and there was a guy who was even bigger than you standing behind the counter, and there was a gun on the wall, which in Britain is not usual. And I smoked then, so I was asking for a packet of cigarettes. And the guy looked there and folded his arms and said, what do you think about Iraq? And I had to translate that back into Iraq, obviously, for my culture. I see what he's saying. And I was kind of dumbfounded. And thankfully, my companion was a journalist and quick with words. And he managed to say something anodyne, which didn't make the guy react. And the guy just looked at us both and he said, yeah, I think we should bomb those fuckers flat. And it's sort of, this is the cradle of civilization we're talking about.
Yeah.
This is Baghdad. This is, why are these people, these poor, poor people, the consequence of Uriah? Because he was angry with the world, because it had stimulated his sense of vendetta, the blood feud, getting his own back. And it doesn't work, does it, Shawn?
No.
You just can't be satisfied, to use Muddy Waters' expression about it.
Yeah. John, let me ask you something that I'm not sure I can, that I understand. See, from my perspective, I don't think we're going to be able to start to challenge war until the individuals are changing. Collective mindsets have never worked. That's why religion doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so we have to work. And so where I'm on my end, that's why my focus is entirely spiritual on the individual, deciding what they believe and how they're going to become a better person in this world, right? Your thing is that it's going to be to stop the war. How can we meld those two? Because from my mind, I don't care that 1 million people are dying right now. I don't care about the big picture stuff. So how can we unite that? And that seems like the beginning of religion. That I'm the shaman saying, let's do this. And you're saying, let's bring world peace. And we form a religion. And then we become the very thing we hate.
Yeah, I think it's not through collectivism that we solve this problem. I think it's through understanding. And, that's been my life's work. Perhaps in our next conversation, we can pick up the list of predatory traits that I teach. I use the term human predator, and I give having gone carefully through the literature, Robert Hare and Kent Keel and M.E. Thomas and on and on and on, from Hervey Cleckley's first work, Mask of Sanity. In fact, even going back to the first time the word psychopath was used, which I think was in 1841, to describe something nothing like the condition now. Then in the First War, when it was found there were a lot of malingerers, there were people who were in hospital who really didn't have anything wrong with them, and the word psychopath was used to describe them. They were people who had a sense of self-preservation, let's face it. Yeah. But I think you change minds and hearts, and that's why your case is vitally important. The idea that somebody who really doesn't care can come to care, and can come to care by reason, not by some emotional experience.
Right.
But, you had your awe experience, but you then took it and made something of it. You worked with it. Now, if that can happen for you, It can happen for almost anyone. There probably are a few Ted Bundys out there that we need to just lock up. Nothing much we can do about that. But I think because there's this kind of balance in society, that there are too many people and the current greed, the current, I'm all right, Jack, I'm looking after me, has become such a powerful drive. Kids, when it used to be, when I was a kid, you'd ask kids what they wanted to be, and they wanted to be a train driver or a fireman. Nowadays, they want to be a content creator. Majority of children. I want to go and make vacuous statements on the internet so that people will love me. Like, believe me, kids, it didn't work for me. What can I say? Oh dear.
Yeah, John, one more thing just from my end on the things we've just said. My goal is to take my experience and help do whatever I can to destroy organized religion mindset. Because I don't think you find more of a collective crazed mentality than the far evangelical right. And I mean, they're almost to where Hitler was. I mean, they're almost there. So if we can, from my perspective, I want to focus on reaching into the church and get them to see that it's reason that we proceed forward on. It is not blind faith. It's just our reason. And that is how I think it will help heal the individual. So that I just want to say that because that's where I'm coming from, and what we do is we're really trying to show what religion really is.
Yeah, and that it's been perverted. I mean, if we look back historically to Constantine, who makes Christianity purportedly the religion of the Roman Empire, and if you want narcissism, this man, his mother reckoned she'd collected the bones of all of the apostles. And when he died, he was put in a sarcophagus at the center with all 12 of them round him.
Oh, I knew she was bad, but I didn't know that one. Wow.
And I what you said earlier about idolatry, that religion in almost all cases tends to be idolatry.
Yeah.
That I'm an agnostic, but that's why I'm not an atheist. I have a tremendous respect for the teachings of all sorts of minor mystics. I mean, some of the Sufi teachers in Islam. Rumi, of course, the most popular poet in America. Isn't it bizarre that a Muslim?
Yeah, that's weird, huh?
But he was incredible. He was like Shakespeare, but without the depressive illness. And I set out when I was 14. I decided I wanted to know the truth. You're 14. What do you know? And I wanted the truth. And even if it was sinister and horrible, I wanted to know what the truth was. And I spent a lifetime following that idea. And I'm incredibly pleased to say at the age of 68 that the truth I've found, and truth, I mean, what does that mean? Is that you can live a happy and reasonable life. You don't have to pretend that, you're going to go to heaven or that this, that, or the others. You can be in the eternal now. You can, it can be happening now, and this is it. And that makes me happy. I mean, something else that I'd like to reflect on from what you said, which I so thoroughly agree with, is you don't believe in hell.
No. Oh, no. Now, biblically, it was a place. It was the covered place that the Jews believe you went to, the place of the dead. So fine. But in my thought on ancient scripture, it's done away with by the victory of of Jesus. And the thing that's interesting about that is religion does not make any sense at all. If Jesus came and he saved the world from our sin, how are we still sinning? If he paid for it all, how are we doing that? And how are we going to hell if, it's just nonsense. There's no reason to it. So, no hell. How could a loving God create us? This is and then no, he's going to send us to hell if he knows everything. Come on.
And who
insidious.
who would we be if we were willing to swan around in heaven knowing that people were being perpetually tortured?
I know. It's so full of, oh, I would
One of
love
the
more depth with you, even just as friends, about religion and also one more thing. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit rabbit traily here,
That's
but
right.
because you're an artist, and you talked about Bowie and you talked about performers. I think there are two places where nobody should have training. Nobody should have the traditions of man passed down to them to reinvent, to replicate, and that is art. I don't think we should have art school. And this is where I wanted to ask you, because I think you might be greatly different. I think that art should come from the soul. And so to teach traditions is teaching people just how to do how art has been done. So I'm against art school and I'm against theology school. Because if it's the study of God, why are we studying the traditions on the study of God when all we're doing is regurgitating them out to people? And it's so individually art school should be between the creator and God, and religion should be between the person and God, and forget about the training. Now, you being an artist, I wanted to hear your thought on that.
It's a very interesting point. I think where schooling is cloning, where it's forcing somebody to have the same thing. I mean, if we look at Egyptian art over the period of 2,000 years, it's all the same. With the exception of the Akhenaten period, where you get this rebellion for one generation. But you can't tell the difference. They're things that are 1,000 years apart, and they all look exactly the same. Now, so that's what's giving you pause, and I understand that. On the other hand, Eric Fromm, in The Art of Loving, which is
I read it.
Absolutely wonderful book. He says that people expect that they'll know how to love, that they'll just see the person and then love will be there. And he says, no, you have to learn it. It's like a painter saying, when I see the perfect subject, then I'll pick up the paints and be able to paint it. So with painting, it is a technical process. It's like playing a musical instrument. So there is something to learn, and there is the craft of painting, which painters nowadays use plastic paints and don't worry about craft. But I only use linen canvas because I know cotton canvas only has a life of 50 years. I stretch it properly so it won't tear. I prime it with something that's permanent. And I then use paint. I don't use fugitive colors, as they're called. You know, during the Impressionist period, chrome yellow was used, and it's a beautiful bright yellow. It's what was used in the Sunflowers by Van Gogh. But it turns green and then black with time. Now, Van Gogh got away with it, and it just turned a kind of dirty, soupy orange because he mixed wax in with his oil paint to make it thicker, what's called an encaustic technique. So you have the craft of the thing, and if you don't have that, you'll do what Picasso and Jackson Pollock did, and you'll use car enamels on canvas. Those paintings are falling apart already. The second thing is you'll learn technique. And if in looking at, say, Rembrandt's approach to painting, Rembrandt, for my money, the greatest representational painter of all time, with no contest. And I've seen, I think, 70 Rembrandts in the flesh now. And I've studied X-rays of them and all sorts of things to understand them. And he knew how to lay in lead white, and his paintings are almost bas reliefs. They're so thick, they're so solid. So the original painting is done in lead, and he would then glaze down over that to get the effects he got. Now, at the beginning of his career, if he painted a lace ruff, there will be 1,000 strokes to make it. By the end of his career, he used straw brushes, round brushes. In fact, flat brushes weren't used till the 19th century. Round straw brushes this big, and it's one stroke. And then the glazers go this way and that way. And when you look at it, so I think there's a proficiency that can be developed, but I agree with you that what tends to happen is that the people teaching impose their view of what's correct. So a friend of mine was at university doing a fine art degree, And one of his tutors, who was a reasonably well-known painter, came over and said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, but I'm not seeing any angst in this work."
Oh.
And my friend looked at him and said, "Oh, good. That's what I was after." So there's so much is imposed from above. Turning to theological college, I think if it's a place where people can discuss and, have discussions such as the one we are having now, rather than a place where they have this imposed upon them. So an aspect of that would be the history of the Bible, where we get to Bart Ehrman and these kind of guys are quite fascinating. John Allegro, back with the Dead Sea Scrolls, who decided ultimately that Jesus had taken hallucinogenic mushrooms. Okay, we went a little bit off the plot there, but
he's allowed.
Yeah, why not? We're talking about it, and exactly that's the important thing. That nothing is verboten. We're allowed to have ideas and talk about them. Which two of my closest friends are Christians, and they really are Christians. I mean, they help people. One of them, I don't know when the last time he went to church was. He's not in the least concerned about that, but he's helped thousands of people, and he charges no money.
That guy's my brother.
Yeah,
guy's my brother. I love that, man.
Yeah, and I'll introduce you to him sometime. But
I would love that.
He's a theologian. That was his part of his training. And if I have some question, if I bring up some knotty problem from Scripture, I know he's not going to shout at me.
Yeah. Thank God.
Yeah, and so we get into biblical history and we go, well, of course there are Babylonian ring seals that show the stories that would come out in the Old Testament. Abraham comes from Ur. He comes from this part of the world, and Jehovah, Yahweh, in his origin, is one of, I think it's 72 offspring of Asherah, who to Christians has become the demon Astarte. But what we are dealing with is the difference between history and psychology. That if the Bible stories get us to, and certainly, I think it's called Pesha by rabbinical scholars, that the Bible Torah is there to be discussed. It's not the end. It's not a set of, apart from the Ten Commandments, it's not a set of rules. It's a set of ideas that can be constantly interpreted by each generation. Often in Christianity, that's the hermeneutics, the exegesis, the idea of looking. It's just become this, and this fascinated me when I was 13 when I walked away from Christianity, because the Christians I was seeing were cruel. They were unforgiving, and so I didn't want anything to do with the God they worshipped. But it started a fascination with the history of religion and the different heresies. So you have, for example, the Donatist heresy. If the priest is impure, is the sacrament still valid? And the Catholic Church ruled it is. And the Albigensians or Cathars said, no, the priest must be perfect. Otherwise it doesn't work. And so the Catholic Church performed genocide on them. It's the first genocide ordered by the Catholic Church in the south of France in the late 12th, early 13th century. And kind of going, I think there may be some basic principle here that's gone wrong, this, as far as I'm concerned, the whole of this business, and I think you and I agree completely on this, if God there is, then God is love, not revenge, not hatred, not I'm superior to you because I believe in the right God. It's right. It is the expression, and it's active. It's not an object. It's a verb. It's a verb. You said that about love in the interview. So, yeah,
right with you. Right with you on all of that, all of it.
You used an expression I liked, which was that you talked about something being the underbelly of all religions. This notion that as we look at religions, wherever we go, we find these individuals who live wonderful and saintly lives, though the reason that some people have been made saints is a little bit odd, like the stylites who sat on top of poles for years.
Yeah.
Well, that's very useful to humanity. Or St. Bridget, of course, who was a Cornish fertility goddess who was adopted into the church to get her followers. It can be a bit difficult. But we see this everywhere, that somebody comes along and they live a good life and they inspire other people to do something. But then we have this thing when the Puritans took over in the 1640s in this country, they whitewashed all of the paintings in the churches. And every now and then, somebody will take the whitewash off and go, oh, there's this incredible painting underneath. These incredible paintings are usually of Armageddon or hell. And I used to think that this was so that the congregation would be frightened and would live good lives so they didn't go there. Then I came to realize it was because the congregation was sitting there again, all the people I hate are going there.
Oh, yeah.
Not really what was intended.
Yeah.
Okay, wow. I think let's come to a pause and let's come back together again in a few weeks' time.
Look forward to it.
Yeah.
So much to talk about because of who you are. I see that I'm able to talk about things because you're so well read in areas that many people aren't. And so when you bring it up, there's no conversation. And so I really think it's going to be beneficial to me as a person. And I'm grateful, John.
Yeah, well, me too. I think this is the beginning of a very interesting adventure. And I hope that the people watching will feel so too. And we'll let Shawn know when we post so he can look at the comments and rage at you in the comments, possibly, like an Old Testament prophet.
Yeah, no more of that.
No.
It looks like it.
That is such a wonderful adornment. What can I say?
Yeah, the only problem is men like it, but the ladies, they're not fans.
No. That's get them to watch the Harry Potter movies and bifurcate it or
Thanks so much, my friend. You have a great weekend.
Yep. And let's we'll say goodbye to the folks here, and I'll switch the recording off. Thank you to everybody for spending time with us, and please do comment because we will try and respond. Even if you say something nasty, but Spike might well take that down if you do. So preferably be courteous. If you want to disagree, do so agreeably if you would. So thanks very much for spending time with us. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.